Thank you very much, Penny. That was fantastic. And you know, we all know that Auckland faces huge challenges over the next 30 years, and it's great to have somebody who's in part of the leadership team helping Auckland develop its directions come speak to us today. Now, the Honourable Nick Smith has been well trailed, so I'm not going to go through the details of his previous career, except to say I found out the other day that he's reported to 3 Prime Ministers and has held 12 ministerial portfolios, including the 3 that he currently manages to run today. What's probably less than well known about Dr. Nick Smith is he's actually an engineer by profession, and he did his PhD thesis on a topic close to the heart of any politician, which is landslides in New Zealand. Now, I don't know if that's relevant to an election year, but I'm sure he'll be using that knowledge to good purpose. So please would you welcome the Honourable Nick Smith.
Kieran, thank you for the invitation. Yep, if I can engineer a bit of a landslide on the 20th of September, that would be on my plan. Can I thank you for the invitation when you are both the Minister of Conservation and Housing. This was an invitation I could not resist. Can I thank Lee for his kind introduction? I always get a bit anxiously when I'm introduced as Dr. Smith, because when I first arrived in Parliament, it was in the days of Sir Robert Muldoon. And when he saw I was a doctor, confronted me and asked me, "Are you one of the doctors that make you well, or one of the ones that make you sick?" I hope I don't have that effect on you. Can I acknowledge Alex Cutler and the work of the Green Building Council, and also acknowledge Deputy Mayor Penny Hulse, who I've been working hard with over the last year around some of Auckland challenges. This morning I want to give you a bit of an overview of the government's thinking about the challenges of how we improve the supply, the affordability and the quality of New Zealand housing. I want to give a bit of an outline of our reform program as it relates both to social housing and affordability. I'm new, only had the portfolio of building and construction for about 6 weeks, so you'll need to excuse me that my thinking in this area is more formative and very much a work in progress. I want to begin by reinforcing just how important housing policy is for New Zealand and as such a hot political topic. Actually, it transcends what our country wants to achieve in a social policy sense, in an economic policy sense, as well as in respect of environment policy. A house is much more than just bricks and mortar. It's a place for families to celebrate birthdays. It's a place of refuge for each of us from the trials of life, and it's a place to call home. A warm, dry house helps us address some of the challenging issues like rheumatic fever, of which New Zealand scores very poorly. A overcrowded home is one that undermines our disadvantaged children from being able to get a good education, can hardly do homework in those sorts of environments. It's no coincidence as we fret over things like local government election participation rates, that if you own your own home, you're twice as more likely to bother voting. It reflects the greater interest and stake that one has in your own community, and there's nothing quite like a rates bill to focus the mind and take an interest in one's city's affairs. But housing's also, and even more now than ever, a crucial economic policy issue. For most Kiwi families, their home is their largest asset. Home ownership is a critical part of financial security and having a comfortable retirement. It's bigger than the individual issue. Actually, collapsing house prices and subprime mortgages were at the core of the global financial crisis of which countries like our own are just recovering from 5 years later. If you look at the economic reports from the OECD, the World Bank and the IMF, as well as our own Reserve Bank and Treasury, house price overvaluation is New Zealand's greatest economic risk as we pull out of the GFC. And of course, as the Green Building Council would know, the third dimension of this is the environmental one. Well-designed homes have far less energy demands, save households in terms of their ongoing power and gas bills, but also help to conserve New Zealand's energy resources and limit our greenhouse gas emissions. So with such importance socially, economic, environmentally, housing policy is an incredibly challenging and exciting area to work. Now, the framework for the government's work program on housing affordability is very much around the 2012 Productivity Commission report. It's a very robust, quality document that I am systematically working through with the government's housing reforms. It identified 5 key areas in which the government needs to make progress around land supply, around the costs of infrastructure, around materials, sector productivity, and compliance works that all need work. The most important of these is land supply and the functioning of the Resource Management Act. It is absolutely clear, particularly in Auckland, that the rise in house prices is directly attributable to a sharp rise in the cost of a section. And if the section's going to cost $350,000, you are not going to get developers putting a $150,000 house on it. And 3 factors have contributed to that very high section cost. The first has been the dysfunctionality of Auckland's previous local government structure. You had the Auckland Regional Council imposing a very tight MUL around the city and banking on housing need being met by extensive urban redevelopment. But simultaneously, you had the 7 territorial authorities who, under pressure from their local neighbourhood of just wanting things to be the same, vigorously resisting any intensification. You then ended up with the worst of both worlds, no greenfields, no brownfields, and a growing undersupply of housing that now sees us about 25,000 houses short of what's needed. And as in any market, if there is constrained supply, growing demand, prices go through the roof. Now, the new single Auckland Council has removed that discontinuity, that mismatch between what has gone on between those 2 tiers of local government, but it is a huge job of catch-up to do. And then there's an overlaying tension between central and local government. The issues of housing affordability largely fall on the plate of central government. It's the Reserve Bank that gets all uptight in terms of what it might do around interest rates. And yet these key levers on respect of supply of housing have been held by local government, and that is why the importance of the accord mechanism of getting central and local government far more in sync. In the debate that's occurred in Auckland, there's been a lot of argy-bargy about the degree to which Auckland might go out as compared with up. Actually, central government's pretty agnostic. We don't mind that much whether the Auckland Council chooses one or the other. Our agenda has been about supply, and at the core of the Auckland Housing Accord is this deal. Auckland Council, deliver 39,000 houses over the next 3 years and we're off your back. Which way, we don't mind, but you need to deliver them. In the event that you fail, we now have the levers to be able to pull housing supply, and that's had a substantive change in the culture. The new unitary plan is a massive undertaking, the largest ever RMA process. Council and government have agreed to streamline a process that would normally take 7 to 10 years down to 3 years. But equally so, neither the city nor government could let things stand still in the interim, which is where that accord is playing a pivotal role. We have to date had 63 special housing areas fast-tracked through. Next Monday I'll be gazetting that latest batch of a further 30, and that has a potential yield of 23,500 homes. I must mention a word of caution in how misplaced environmental thinking can produce quite perverse outcomes. These are from an environmentalist perspective, those who oppose greenfield development on the grounds of two quite flawed perspectives. The first is people say they're opposed to greenfields because it's going to chomp up all of New Zealand's productive land, and because agriculture is at the core of our exports, we must stop it. And then there is an equally flawed argument in respect of greenhouse gas emissions. If you look at the hard numbers around the growth of cities and the portion of our nation's land that we use for housing, it is infinitesimally small. And even if every single new citizen, both born and migrating to New Zealand, was to have a quarter-acre section over the next 50 years, we would use up less than 1% of New Zealand's productive land, and our agricultural sector is delivering 1.5% productivity growth every single year. It is a non-argument. The argument that urban sprawl must be stopped to address climate change is equally flawed. If you look at some of the analysis of the carbon footprint of urban city dwellers in apartments, they are higher than those in suburbia. And this is not an argument for urban sprawl. My argument is whether it be intensification or whether it be greenfields development. It is the quality of the design, not whether it be green or brown, that is the qualifying factor. That is, if we are to have greenfields development, ensuring that there is the educational facilities, the recreational facilities, the employment opportunities and the infrastructure is going to be the key test as to whether it meets New Zealand's needs in respect of the environment and sustainability, rather than the simplistic notion that it is simply an issue of brown or greenfields development, and I'm pleased that there's an increased level of balance around that. Now, the second big issue over land supply after land supply has been the issue of development contributions. They have increased more than any other part of the house price equation over the last decade, roughly trebling, and they are now some districts over $60,000 per section. We have new legislation currently going before Parliament that rightly constrains these costs by reversing the very open definitions put into the law in 2002 and by introducing a low-cost appeal process. I started my political career in local government. It's a no-brainer if you're sitting around the council table and you're saying to yourself, we've got a cost, do we dump it on the developer or should the ratepayers pay the bill? Now let me think. There are 16,000 ratepayers, there are 4 developers in my town. Who would I rather peeve off? It's a simple choice. The incentives are wrong, they need to change, and that's what that law reform is about. Our work on building materials bites next week when the duties and tariffs on all building materials are removed. We need only look at a product like plasterboard, with due respect to your sponsor, where New Zealand costs are 30% higher than Australia, to see why such a reform is needed. Why I want to see as much New Zealand product used as is possible in our building industry. We also need to recognise that we are a small market and the international competitive pressures are essential if we are to deliver on our affordability goals. This brings me to some of the issues of building regulation in my new area of responsibility. Tariffs and duties are not the only barrier to imported product. There are structural issues in our building standard system that we need to have a fresh look at if we are to get the increased competition and innovation that's crucial for our building industry. A good local example is a company that has started up in the Nelson region with long-established hot water heat pump technology, which has efficiency gains not dissimilar from those of solar power, but where product that has been used in Europe for more than 10 years has taken more than 2 years to get through our regulatory system. That is not helping innovation, it's not helping sustainability, and those things need to change. I'm a strong believer in whole-of-life affordability, but I am also cautious of the government excessively regulating in such areas. I'm also a bit of a cynic of the degree to which government can better predict the future than private individuals. In my own community in the top of the south, local councils got into a real fever about internet technology and making sure that we were future-proofing our houses. They made it a requirement that councils when you built a home, you had to install wired internet within your home, adding about $2,000 per house. Within 5 years, Wi-Fi technology had come along, and we had completely simply wasted people's doughs through inappropriate regulatory intervention, and that is one of the reasons for caution. I'll give you an equal example at the moment where I'm building my own home in Nelson with grown-up teenagers. And our local council, with the best of intentions, has required in their resource management plan that when you design a house that it must face the street, the lounge and the living areas. The objective for this is that they wish to make a neighbourhood safer, and their feeling is that by requiring that, they will indeed provide for safer streets. And you would all understand there is some element of logic in what they are arguing. But to require homes in my particular street where the sunshine is in the opposite direction simply hugely compromises the ability of getting a sustainable house, because some of the biggest gains is actually in smart architecture rather than in products. And that again makes me cautious of how much blunt regulation can actually help achieve the sort of design gains that we're seeking in sustainability. A not indifferent argument confronts us in the debate around where we might go with the housing warrant of fitness. At the moment, the government is trialling a warrant of fitness on our own state housing stock, and we've had some interesting surprises. The first is that if you are going to apply, as some are advocating, a blunt rule that says that you cannot rent a home unless it meets this minimum requirement of insulation, the estimates are that you would take out of circulation over 25,000 houses in New Zealand. And what is that going to do in respect of supply and affordability, given our own experience with Housing New Zealand, where there is a portion of our stock, small as it may be, that cannot practically be insulated. And so my plea is, as we work through these sorts of regulatory issues, that we apply a good dose of pragmatism and connect with both the economics and the reality of design before we jump to simplistic conclusions. I do want to challenge your conference today around the government's very substantial social housing reforms. We come from a perspective that there is a very important role for government to provide social housing for our most needy citizens. Just as with the Productivity Commission report on housing affordability, the government's social housing reforms are based on the comprehensive report produced in 2010 called the Vision for Social Housing. It is a radical shake-up of how the government manages and invests in providing housing for our most needy citizens. We are shifting from a monolithic state housing provider of 68,000 homes to a far more diverse sector. We already have 30 social housing providers registered. Furthermore, we have an objective of 12,000 houses, or about 20% of social housing being provided by non-government social housing providers over a period of 5 years. The big change occurred in April when the government opened up access to the income-related rent subsidy to social housing providers. Let me explain why that is so significant. If you are the Salvation Army, or whether you're IHC or any of our large number of social service organisations, including iwi, and you looked at investing in social housing, it is a complete financial loser. That is, the rents that you can reasonably expect from our most disadvantaged families makes it a very poor investment. But the government actually provides Housing New Zealand with an average subsidy of $10,000 a year or $200 a week. And by opening up access to that income-related rent subsidy, a total that the government spends of $700 million per year, by opening up access to that subsidy to whether you are IHC or whether you are any one of those 30 organisations, you suddenly make investing in social housing for those organisations a real option. There is huge interest, particularly from iwi, in becoming social housing providers, and I am encouraged by the amount of growth that is going to occur over the next 5 years in that sector, and my challenge to those that are playing in that field of sustainability housing to engage with those new players, because your message of ensuring you focus not just on the cost of build, but the cost of living in those homes is even more crucial for those people on very marginal incomes. The three gains that the government is looking for from those social housing reforms is firstly, that those social housing providers are able to provide more than a house. That is, many of these people that require state, as we've known it, or social housing in future, have more than needs of just a roof over their head, but whether it be whānau ora and family support services, whether it be mental health services, drug and alcohol, all of those range of services can be wrapped around those families. The second is it doesn't matter whether you look at Housing New Zealand, council housing, or any state housing entity around the world, they have a very poor track record in the maintenance of their stock. What happens is they build flash new houses and they forget about them for 40 years, and every now and then there's a massive political explosion that involves a massive investment in improving the quality of that stock. Social housing providers internationally have a far better record of maintaining their housing stock. And the third area where the government is looking for gains is that we don't believe in the house for life notion of social housing, and social housing providers have a far better track record of providing the housing for the period of need and then making sure those houses are made available for other families as needs change. Not only have we opened up access with the income-related rent with those reforms in April, but this month myself and the Minister of Finance announced the establishment of the Independent Transactions Unit that is going to be involved in transferring significant portions of a state housing stock over to those community housing providers, and I simply inform you of that as players in the sector to understand what's occurring. In my view, some of the biggest gains of the sector is actually not going to come from some of those issues of regulation, but is actually going to be from innovation and education. The goal has always got to be connected to the issue of improved housing affordability. We need to ensure that every added cost, whether it be in terms of double glazing, or whether it be in terms of insulation or solar water or photovoltaics, any part of that stacks up in terms of economic analysis. And as I say again, the biggest gains that we can make in terms of sustainability is going to be around smart design, of which I know this conference is focused on. Thank you again for the invitation to address your conference. Best wishes for your deliberations. You are part of the modern face of what the New Zealand home needs to look like for the next century ahead. Thank you very much.